All right, people, let's get into it. I am Garrett, and today we are talking about 5 tips for better lighting in video. If you're a videographer or filmmaker who finds their lighting to be flat, boring, uninteresting, or inconsistent, these tips will help you take your lighting to the next level to make it more filmic for your next project. Tip number 1 is to understand light quality. And when we talk about light quality specifically, I mean the behavior of that light. And we measure that on a scale of harsh to soft. Harsh lighting is lighting that is very direct and very sourcey, where soft lighting is much more appealing to the eye and definitely adds a nice gradient to our contrast. The way that you can tell the type of lighting environment you are creating is by looking at the shadows on your subject. If the lines of the shadow are hard lines, that means that you are in a harsh lighting environment. Think like a bright sunny day outdoors. A soft lighting environment, that shadow line is not going to be hard as much as it is going to have a really nice soft gradient roll off between your shadows and your highlights. Generally, people tend to look better in soft lighting than harsh lighting, but you should make the creative decision of what lighting style you are going to use or what behavior of light you are going to use by the story that you're trying to tell. Tip number 2 is the role of positions within lighting. Most people, when they start out, are taught 3-point lighting, which is a key light where the main source of your light is, a fill light, which reduces unattractive or unwanted shadows, and a hair light or backlight, which is going to separate your foreground from your background. Truthfully, you do not need 3 light fixtures for every lighting setup, and oftentimes, depending on the story you're telling, that is not the lighting that we're looking for. So instead of focusing on having 3 fixtures pointed at every single one of your subjects, think about what the purpose of those lights are, and utilize that theory and those purposes to your advantage. A key light might not be a fixture, it may be a window, right? Where we're using the sunlight as a key light. Fill lights also may not be a fixture. They could be something as easy as a reflector or a bounce card, right? Or some other way where we can take the light source that's coming from our key and push that back onto our subject's face to again fill in unwanted shadows without eliminating contrast. The third and final one is that backlight or hair light, and we can determine how we separate our foreground from our background by wardrobe choices, by blocking and positioning, and by the way that we frame. This frame is a good example here, right? I have a very dark background behind me, but I'm wearing very light colored clothing, which helps separate me from that background without even needing to use a light. Tip number 3 is color temperature and mood. Lighting, right, is all dictated by the white balance of our camera. We match the white balance of our camera to the color temperature of light our lights are producing. But we can play with that, right? We're able to adjust and manipulate that to create a mood. Do we want it to feel very warm and inviting? Do we want it to feel very cold and calculated? Do we want it to feel a little green and unforgiving? Do we want it to feel a little red, as if we're hot, right? We can play with color to affect the mood, and even though our white balance should be balanced to a neutral white of what our fixtures are naturally, we can get creative and make lighting setups that feel the way we want them to feel. Tip number 4 is controlling natural light. There's this misconception in beginning and intermediate filmmaking that available light and natural light are the same thing, and they're not. Available light is just the light that's given. Natural light is the way that the lighting looks. It looks natural. But when we are filming for a natural lighting look, that doesn't mean we are only in available lighting. We need to modify that available light for a couple of reasons. The first is for consistency. Whether it's a partly cloudy day, whether the weather is turning, whether the time of day changes throughout the production, the lighting behavior throughout the day is going to be different. If we don't assist and modify that available light, we're not going to have that consistency both in terms of our exposure and light behavior throughout our production day. A couple of easy tricks for getting that outdoor or available light look to work more naturally in our productions are, number one, putting some sort of diffusion between your subject and the sun. Even if you're working on a cloudy or partly cloudy day, adding that extra layer of diffusion is going to help with that exposure consistency and behavior consistency, because cloud levels can change, but if we have soft lighting built in, we're going to be much more consistent. The other thing to keep in mind is on the shadow side of our subject's face. Just because we're shooting in available light doesn't mean that we're actually getting the fill that we want on that side, which again is driven by the tone of the project or the emotion of the project that we're filming. So having things like bounce cards, having things like reflectors, scrims, negatives, those kind of things, you can actually then adjust and change the behavior of the light on the shadow side of your subject's face to feel the way that you want it to feel. Tip number 5, which arguably is the most important, is to make sure that you are shooting on the shadow side of your subject's face. If you're finding that your shots are looking dull or flat, or your subjects are generally looking uninteresting visually, chances are that you are filming on the same side of your subject as your key light. Key light is on me over here, and if I was facing this way and you're filming here, my face by and large looks fairly flat. Whereas on this side of my face, which is the shadow side of my face, you get much more contrast across the face than you do on the key side. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You can play with how much or how little you want it to be. Even in a head-on shot, there's contrast from one side to the other. But if you focus on shooting on the shadow side of your subject's faces, you're going to immediately be building in more contrast and more visual interest in your subjects. Keeping all 5 of these tips in mind, you will become a much better cinematographer, videographer, and filmmaker with practice. Play with these. Make these work to your advantage. The more you try, the more risks you take, the more you'll discover about yourself as a filmmaker. I'm Garrett Sammons. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube under my name, and I look forward to talking to y'all soon.